Welcome to the Festival of Dangerous Ideas podcast. My name is Danielle Harvey and I'm the festival director. FODI is the original Disruptive Ideas Festival based in Sydney, Australia, that aims to bring to light important conversations that push the boundaries of conventional thought. FODI gathers the world's best experts, innovative thinkers and mischief makers to provoke and inspire curious minds. Throughout history, we have found ways to regulate human behaviour through the threat of social exclusion. But while cancellation is not new, the online sphere has radically shifted the way we punish perceived wrongdoing. Is redemption possible in the digital age? And how can we shift from condemnation to compassion? Join comedian and author David Baddiel, cultural commentator Roxane Gay, and podcast hosts and producers Andy Mills and Megan Phelps-Roper. This is the 2024 session, Uncancelled Culture, chaired by philosopher Tim Dean.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's lovely to see you all here. Welcome to the Uncancelled Culture panel. Now, cancellation itself is not new. Cancellation is actually as old as humanity. Our best knowledge of the way that even small hunter-gatherer societies regulated behaviour was through the threat of social exclusion, the threat of isolation. Pushing an individual out of a small-scale society like that would be almost tantamount to a death sentence. We've become intensely and acutely aware of the threat of being excluded and isolated from a community. But we can even think about, in the early days of written history, the Athenians used to scratch a name onto a small piece of pottery called an ostracon. And if enough people wrote the same name and popped that into a jar, the person who that name belonged to would be exiled from Athens for 10 years. And it's from that word, ostracon, that we get the word ostracism today. But we can also think about religious excommunication as a form of social exclusion, punishing people for perceived wrongdoing. We can even look at just the schoolyard and the kind of snubbing that might go on and how acutely we feel that. So the idea of cancellation is not new, but what is new is social media. And something seems to have happened in the last couple of decades that has changed the way we think about holding people to account. It's changed the way that we punish perceived wrongdoing and how we inflict appropriate kind of punishment on them or seek their kind of rehabilitation, if we even seek that rehabilitation at all. So these are some of the topics that we're going to be talking about on the panel today. My name is Dr. Tim Dean. I'm the senior philosopher at the Ethics Centre and I hold the Manos Chair in Ethics. And I'm very delighted to introduce a wonderful panel of people who are going to help us to explore some of these themes. So first up we have Roxane Gay. Roxane is a New York Times best-selling author of Bad Feminist and many other books and publications. She is a professor, editor and social commentator. She's a contributing opinion writer for the New York Times, where she also writes the Work Friend column. She's also the author of the New York Times bestselling Hunger, a Memoir of My Body, and the nationally bestselling Opinions, a Decade of Arguments, Criticism, and Minding Other People's Business. She is currently working on a range of film and television projects, books, essays, and a young adult novel. She's also the Gloria Steinem Endowed Chair in Media, Culture, and Feminist Studies at Rutgers University, New Brunswick. We also have David Baddiel. David is a comedian, an author, a screenwriter, and television presenter. He began his career as a writer and star of numerous UK TV comedy shows, and in 1992 he performed at the UK's first ever comedy arena show at Wembley. He's also an award-winning author of children's books and novels, and in 2021 he released the Sunday Times Politics Book of the Year, his polemic Jews Don't Count, followed with a TV documentary that aired in 2022. David's most recent book, The God Desire, was released in 2023 and explores his keen desire to believe in a deity and why this very desperation to believe proves his atheism is correct. Now, you can hear a lot more about David's views at his talk later this evening, The John Calden Provocation, at 6:45 p.m. tonight. We also have Megan Phelps-Roper. Megan was born and raised in the Westboro Baptist Church, but she left a life of religious extremism in 2012. She spent the past decade using her experience to work with schools on anti-bullying campaigns, with law enforcement organisations investigating de-radicalisation, and with tech companies on the intersection of safety, free speech, and the value of dialogue across ideological divides. Her journey has been chronicled in The New Yorker, a trio of BBC documentaries, a TED Talk, and her memoir, Unfollow. She hosted and produced The Witch Trials of J.K. Rowling, an audio documentary that examines some of the most contentious conflicts of our time through the life and career of the world's most successful author. Finally, we have Andy Mills. Andy is an American reporter and a podcast producer who co-created The Daily and the New York Times, Reflector, which he hosts, and several documentary series including Rabbit Hole and The Witch Trials of J.K. Rowling. He has reported on and produced series from across the world spanning politics, terrorism, culture wars, technology, and science. He is a former fundamentalist Christian who grew up in Louisiana and Illinois, once believing that those who didn't share his exact views were damned to hell. He is now an enthusiast for curiosity, skepticism, grace, and the transformative power of listening to people you disagree with. So please welcome the panel to the stage. Roxane, I want to go to you first. As I said, cancellation isn't new. The threat of social exclusion isn't new. But there's something about social media that is new. Now, you've written about social media. You have a wonderful line from an essay that you had in your book that was originally from the New York Times, saying that you felt online engagement is fueled by the hopelessness many feel when we consider the state of the world and the challenges we deal with in our day-to-day lives. And online spaces often offer a hopeful fiction of tangible cause and effect. And you've recently changed the way you use social media. How has social media affected the way that we judge others?
Well, unfortunately and fortunately, social media is ubiquitous, and it gives you access to all kinds of voices all the time. And that can be wonderful, but sometimes too much feedback is really counterproductive. And there's no fact-checking on social media, so people can take something that you say, represent it out of context, get people riled up because they think they know what you actually said, but they don't. And then when you present the truth, it doesn't matter anymore because what the original person has said becomes truth. And so we have a lot of misinformation, we have a lot of lack of context, and so that creates a ripe environment for people to attack those things that they see as injustices. And a lot of us feel impotent in our day-to-day lives. And so there's something satisfying about knowing I can call something out and other people will react, when most of the time when we try to create change, whether in our lives or in our world, nothing really happens. It feels like you're shouting into a void. And in social media, the void shouts back.
It does. David, you produced a BBC documentary. You started a BBC documentary called Social Media, Anger and Us, where you looked at what social media is doing to us, our minds, our bodies. You even slid into an MRI and read a series of unflattering tweets. What is social media? What did you learn from that? What is social media doing to us?
Well, one of the things it does is it create a very, very intense and paralysing self-consciousness, which I can feel now because I'm worried that I might say something that will get me cancelled on this session. But that particular documentary was about anger and why there seems to be so much anger on social media. And one of the reasons, and there may be lots of other reasons, so, by the way, a lot of the anger that social media channels can be seen as justified, and it has, without doubt, been a source where underrepresented voices have found, as Roxane said, have found a way of talking, sometimes in a way that feels fictional, and sometimes that is actually real and has effect. But what it has also done is, I would say, increase the sum total of anger in our culture. And one reason why I think that's happened is that I think it is primarily not a marketplace of ideas, but a marketplace of identity. And what happens if you've got a marketplace of identity is people project their ideas and their opinions as if they are their identity. And how do we, you mentioned history, how do we create identity? We create identity generally in opposition. That's how we do it over many, many, many centuries. How do we create identity in religion? We are Catholic, so we hate Protestants. We are Sunni, so we hate Shia. There's modern versions of that. In football, I'm a Chelsea fan, so I hate Tottenham. Whatever else it might be. That's how you create tribal identity. You do it by saying everyone who is not me is someone who I must hate. And so therefore what you get very much, if you've got the ability, which you do have on social media, to have every single person create their identity and broadcast their identity in a performative way, is they tend to list, not all of them obviously, but they tend to list towards, here is my identity and I am reinforcing it by being angry about everyone who is not me.
Yeah, so there's an interesting point. The marketplace of ideas, which is this kind of hypothetical fictional space talked about by John Stuart Mill and others, where we can ostensibly just contest ideas in a rarefied space detached from our identity. And that doesn't seem to be what internet, what social media is. I know Elon Musk talks about Twitter as being the town square, and I wonder if he's appealing to this idea of having the ability to have a marketplace of ideas. Yet I don't believe a town square had an algorithm channeling certain ideas to certain people. That said, you've raised an interesting point before, Andy, where you've said that the idea of getting together and hashing out ideas isn't new. And you've mentioned that the founding fathers were trying to create a way to have a contest of ideas.
This is the American founding fathers, everybody.
The American founding fathers.
The best.
So you've done it there.
So how did they do it?
I was bringing this up in the context of like social media was a sneaky big deal. Like when we all signed up for MySpace when I was working at like Starbucks and college, I didn't think this technology is going to change society. I just thought it'd be cool. AI is interesting because as AI comes around, we're all like, oh shit, this could really change the world. And so we're having all these conversations about how will we put values into AI and how is our society going to manage AI. And we didn't do that with social media, and it surprisingly had this massive impact on how we communicate, on how we think about each other, on how we adjudicate justice. And I was bringing it up, we did this with the printing press, and the printing press for a time helped to fuel the moral panic around witch trials, and yet it also helped to fuel the Enlightenment. And there are aspects of the way that the American founding fathers used it that surprisingly look like the early days of social media, where they were writing under a pseudonym for these publications, where they were trying to advocate for their ideas in public. Sometimes these were dangerous ideas, sometimes they were controversial ideas, right? And we eventually found a way to do that thoughtfully. And I think as flawed as those times were, they offer a sense of wisdom for the times that we're living in now. I'd say it's a little bit different than the conversation that y'all are bringing up about how we adjudicate justice through this technology and which parts of it are ancient and which parts of it are new. And I think that one of the things that's going on here is it's very similar to what's happening in a lot of the institutions and a lot of our lives, which is that people don't know what stuff's for anymore. Like what we were talking in a panel earlier, what is journalism for? What are the values that are at the bedrock? What are the values that we're trying to live as a society, as people on this website, as people who belong to a political group? And a part of what's been so frustrating about the thing that we call cancel culture is that it looks like a virtue when it's actually a vice. And even though a lot of people who participate in it, I'm not saying they are bad people, I think a lot of them have a lust for justice. It's that it often isn't justice they serve, it's cruelty. It's alienation. It's actually punitive in ways that if we really stop to look at it, I think we would question if that's the course of action we really want to take with this technology.
Yeah, there's an interesting moral dimension to the way discourse seems to unfold on social media. And I mean, I've said before that the most dangerous people in the world are not the selfish people, because they're not willing to incur a cost in order to see their will done. They want to get a profit out of it. But those who have complete moral certainty around things are willing to make every possible sacrifice in order to get things done. They're willing to see things burn down. And I think there's a difference in the way the interface between identity and anonymity and the online discourse feeds into that. Megan, when you were at Westboro Baptist Church, you were online a lot. You were on Twitter a lot. You were broadcasting your message a lot. What did you see in terms of how people responded to what you were posting? And how were some of those toxic and were some of those constructive?
Yes, is the short answer. Initially, when I first got on Twitter, I was just there to spread the church's message. I wasn't there to receive anything back. I just wanted to preach to people because we really thought we have the truth and we just have to go and disseminate it. And literally, these people have nothing. We have nothing to learn from these people. And initially, the kind of responses that I got back were exactly, similar to what I got on the picket line. Right, so we're standing out there and we have these incredibly provocative and hateful messages. And people were provoked and they would respond in kind. They would be extremely angry and outraged and attacking me personally. I mean, which again, they're just mirroring what I'm doing to them or what they perceive that I'm doing to them. And that's happening on Twitter initially. But pretty quickly, it was amazing how these individuals who just in sort of leading with curiosity, they recognize that I was a human being and that I had come to these positions because I was raised in it and it had been drilled into me from the time I was old enough to understand words. And they started to ask questions. And because I had so much, experience with all the hatefulness, I just, brushed it off. So death threats, rape threats, all that stuff, it just, went off of me very easily. But the curiosity and the kindness, those things were penetrating in a way that it still kind of shocks me because I had been specifically raised to be wary of kindness from outsiders. I mean, there's, the Bible verses about this. Faithful are the wounds of a friend, but the kisses of an enemy are deceitful. And so even though I was raised to see the kindness of outsiders as this thing that would seduce you away from the truth and it was evil and you had to be wary of it, in spite of my wariness, I was moved by it. And I think that's a very human thing. I didn't learn about this until after I left the church, but this idea of how human beings are wired for complementary behaviour. So people are wired to respond in kind. And so the power of non-complementary behaviour, it starts a new feedback loop, in other words. It's like if somebody comes at you angry and you are kind to them in response, it's kind of hard to continue being an asshole, if you will, to those people. And so it ended up being this completely transformative thing. So first, I start mirroring it back to the people who are kind to me. And then I start engaging with the hateful people who come at me. So it starts to become like a game for me to approach them with kindness. So they're angry at me and I approach them with kindness. And how can I turn this angry insult into a productive conversation? And so it amazes me how those new feedback loops can start.
And I want to get back to some of these themes later about how we respond and how we create a constructive culture. Given an assumption that we live in a more diverse, a more fragmented world than ever before, in a more interconnected world, what tools we can bring to it. I want to come back to that. I want to talk for a moment about the term cancel culture. So cancellation may not be new and it's happening, but what does the culture aspect mean? And I think about culture as the expectations of how we're supposed to behave, that are policed, and we may not even know they're policed. They're kind of invisible to us until we cross a line. But we become aware of the culture, we become aware of those norms when we feel like we're rubbing up against them. So let me just ask all of you on the panel, are there times when you feel yourself self-censoring, when you feel yourself deliberately not saying something that you honestly and authentically believe because you're fearful of the backlash that you might get from either friends or strangers? I mean, I know I self-censor. You do as well?
I think
Sorry.
Yeah, I don't know. It feels in some ways like we're in the midst of a change right now since Elon Musk blew Twitter up. For better or for worse, I appreciate that it isn't what it once was, even if it hasn't necessarily become a great place. So I don't know if I self-censor in the way, if you would ask me that question in 2020, for sure. I mean, and it's one thing to do as an individual, but it's more whenever it's whole industries or it's whole groups. Once again, we were talking in an earlier panel about journalism, that even at some of the most important institutions in American journalism, people are afraid to do what they're being asked to do and to report accurately on stories because they're thinking about how this might affect their career, how it might affect their lives. And it's not even always about dramatic stuff. It's just that you don't want your group to think you suck. You don't want to be in the center of a dog pile. That's just natural. So you don't want to write even like a Pete Buttigieg story that you think that Twitter might not like because I think they're mad at him this week. And it can feel weirdly authoritarian, but instead of it coming from a Putin, it's coming from like your social group and you're trying to read the room all the time. But once again, it comes back to, it's not necessarily new. Like they were playing the Dixie Chicks before we came in here. Is anybody Dixie Chick fans? Still. They're always Dixie to me. No, I'm kidding. I love them. And they obviously had this thing happen way before we had the phrase cancel culture. They had this big backlash that happened. The thing that's weird is that they were famous people, and that happened to them. And now it feels like I, in my career, have interviewed so many people who've gone through versions of this, who are like a high school kid, somebody who's a part of like a gymnastics, club, people who are way out of the spotlight, but they're going through similar versions of this, and it has become a bit of a cultural thing. I don't know if it's happening as much in the public figure world. In some ways, I think it's moved from, you could get fired from your fancy job, which its heyday of that may have been 2020, and I worry now more about the high school kid, and this is happening inside of a WhatsApp group, in a small town. At least that's what I'm seeing.
Me? Sorry. It's slightly weird because I have a thing where I find it very difficult not to say exactly what I'm feeling all the time. In fact, my wife said to me recently, "Have you ever thought about saying the second thing that comes into your head?" And I don't really. That isn't how I operate. And so it's kind of weird to be living in a culture where you self-police all the time. And I certainly, when I'm talking, find that really fucking difficult. It's like, oh no, I've said something wrong. Oh no, I've done it again. But then I have to keep speaking. Obviously, the process of writing, so this is something that I don't think people think about that much, which is we're not actually designed to write this much stuff down in public all the time. So I've been like the subject in Britain of about 200 different Twitter storms from both right and left. And one thing I've noticed is that sometimes people write like Charles Dickens at me. Like, this man should be drawn and quartered in the public square. And what that suggests to me is that people are not used to writing in public, right? And when they do, they think they should write like Charles fucking Dickens, right? And, because it sounds more important and more sort of gravitas laden or whatever. And I think that what it is bad for our culture that you might get into a situation where many things are not being said. Right, many things, and I've got 2 kids who are 19 and 22, and I feel they have been brought up with a sense like they need to be a bit careful about what they say, especially online. At the same time, I also think we have a situation where it's a technology that allows people to speak all the time and write down all the time, and that might be a good thing not to always say something. It might be a good thing occasionally not to say things and to learn not to say things, having been given this overwhelming opportunity to speak all the time.
Let's do a quick show of hands from the audience. Do you find yourself self-censoring, either online or just when you're around friends and family? Raise your hand if you do self-censor from time to time.
Try being autistic.
So I'm seeing a lot of hands. So that's it. Okay. So it's something I think we all share. I do want to get to an idea, a word that has come up already, which is accountability. Holding someone to account. And Roxane, you've talked about this. You've talked about how cancel culture is another way of thinking about like consequence culture is a term that you've used. And I really like this line where you said, but we haven't necessarily figured out what the consequences should be. How do we understand the difference between cancellation in a kind of pejorative sense and consequence culture is something that we might want to encourage?
Well, there are consequences for everything we say and do. And that's why people often censor themselves if they have an impolitic thought that they know is a problem. And that's, we pull ourselves back. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. It becomes a bad thing when everyone becomes silent because we worry that the world is too brittle to absorb our realities or the things that we have to say. But unfortunately, and social media has amplified this, when people make mistakes, people are like, as he said, like, let's get them drawn and quartered. There's no sense of scale and proportion. Like, someone makes a rude remark, someone made a terrible joke in 2010. It's 2024, so perhaps we should scale the response between nothing and they should lose their job and they should never ever be able to work again. And we just don't seem to know how to calibrate. And social media is not a good place for calibration of any kind, because it's this place where we can say anything we want, however we want, all the time. And the thing about Twitter is that, yeah, he calls it a town square, but then he puts sewage all over it. And, it's a mess. And right now, a lot of racism, transphobia, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, like really every kind of bigotry is flourishing on Twitter. And there should be consequences for that. People should be ashamed to put their real names behind some of the really toxic ideologies that they're sharing. It's not for me to decide like what happens next, but I think that receiving some negative feedback for saying terrible things is not the end of the world.
Megan, I want to go to you because something that was interesting around the Witch Trials podcast was the kind of emphasis that you placed on engagement and persuasion. So if we can now talk about consequence of holding people to account, but then trying to kind of steer their behaviour towards something more constructive. Do you think that there is always a possibility for engagement, or do you think so I'm remembering what Natalie Wynn, who was a guest on your podcast, and then also produced a YouTube video critiquing the podcast and her role on it, where she said, yes, engagement's good, but sometimes you don't need to engage, you just need to defeat. Is there a time when you need to defeat, or is engagement always going to be the way to go?
So I have a few thoughts here. The first is when you talk, so there is a line, I think, for engagement. You said, is there always a possibility? I think almost always. The line that I would draw personally is if I feel like danger, like physical danger. If I am in physical danger, I don't want to engage. I know that obviously there's a lot of people, I don't know if you guys know Daryl Davis, who's an American jazz musician who is black and who is famous for converting some 200 members of the KKK to leave that organization because through these conversations that he has with them. So he actually was putting himself in a position to, he was putting himself in physical danger to do that. I would find that difficult. I think a lot of people would find that difficult. But when Natalie said that, my first thought was, what does it mean to defeat someone? And in context, she was talking about an infamous bigot. And she said Anita Bryant didn't need to be persuaded, she needed to be defeated. And to my mind, that means for Anita Bryant and it's for her ideology to be defeated, for her ideas to be defeated. And that means that we have to persuade people at scale that her ideas are wrong. So for me, it always comes back to persuasion, because we live together in society and it matters what other people believe. And yeah, so I'm very much on the side of more engagement than less, as much as possible.
When I did my documentary, this brilliant woman who was on it called Ayesha Akambi said what we've done with social media is we're living in an open plan mansion with everyone we hate. And there is an element of that, and it feels like that, but you're right, we've got to find a way of making it sort of not that.
And I should say, obviously, it changes from day to day and from moment to moment, whether you feel compelled or whether you have the capacity to engage with someone. And that changes for me too. I do it as much as possible, but when I can't, I don't. And so again, it's just on the side of more engagement than less. And not to maybe try to punish people or think that it's wrong for someone to try to engage. which I think that happens a lot as well. It's like it becomes guilt by association to have anything to do with someone who has the wrong ideas or who is, propagating bad ideas.
I think we can't overestimate how much these conversations are happening in public, and that is new. Obviously, we had public forums before, but it's ultra public. And so therefore, if you're having a conversation in public which is an argument, then suddenly there is the possibility of something which there isn't straightforwardly in the objective switching of ideas, which is public humiliation and public shaming. So therefore, what tends to happen when people are arguing in public on social media is you can see that it's incredibly important for them to win. And that's not what the exchange of ideas should be about. They feel they might lose, and so therefore they have to win, and that's when it becomes so much about insult and abuse and a meme that will essentially make you feel like a twat, whatever it might be. It's designed to shut down the other person so that you aren't shut down.
Which goes back to your earlier point about the role of identity. And there's, like philosophers and psychologists talk about the argument as war metaphor, which we slip into so easily. The idea that I need to defeat my opponent, I need to undermine their argument, I need to destroy their position. And in that metaphor, victory is a defense of my identity. But if it turns out that my beliefs are crap, and my mind is changed, that's perceived to be a defeat on my behalf.
Yeah.
So the connection of identity to that and that argument as war metaphor can be really destructive. But I do appreciate that there might be times to fight. Roxane, when are there times when engagement is not appropriate? When are there kinds of speech where the right response is to fight or to defeat?
Well, I think anytime you encounter hate speech, and there's so much of it, and the idea that you can just sort of sit down and mediate with these people, it does work for some people. I have not found that to be the case for me. I don't have the temperament for that at all. And I'm a Libra, so that's saying something, because in general I'm very mellow. But when you encounter hatred, and the kind that's clearly either designed to be provocative because someone is like lonely and sitting in their basement, or they're a true believer, and I don't even know which one is worse. They're not trying to be reached. They just want to share their thoughts. They just want to get it out because they don't feel like they can anywhere else, and thank goodness for that. And so in instances like that, this is one of the many reasons I left Twitter, but I see that as open season and an invitation to respond, and yes, to absolutely destroy you like the cockroach you are. And it feels good, and because it started feeling good is why I actually left Twitter, because I just didn't like who I was becoming, and like, why am I even doing this with these people who are not going to learn anything? They're never going to go read a book. I'm not even talking about my books, just like little books. And so I just think comes a point where you just have to realize some people can't be reached, or not even that they can't be reached, they're not going to be reached on social media. It might happen elsewhere. I find that people say lots of things online, and then face to face they're really lovely. And I always think, oh, you're afraid of me in person, and so you're going to pretend you like my book. Oh, thank you. But online, they'll talk all kinds of shit. And so I think it's also important to remember that maybe we should be moving a lot of these conversations off of social media and into the face-to-face realm where we have more decorum and common sense.
Thank you. I'm also, Andy, I'm reminded here of your most recent, or a recent podcast, Reflector, talking about the witch trials of J.K. Rowling, a couple of episodes recapping and reflecting on that. And I scrolled down on the website and saw the comments section under that, which I don't normally read, but I saw the comments, and there was someone who was pushing back against what you were doing and what you were saying, and you engaged with that person. You engaged in an attempt, looked like a good faith attempt to bring them on board. How did that go?
It went pretty poorly. But
you persisted.
I'm friends with Megan Phelps-Roper, so her voice is in one ear all the time. And I mean, keep in mind, she's definitely Roxane. She's one of the ones you would have been hopeless for. And it is a sign of hope. I mean, I don't know anyone who's ever gone harder and said worse shit on the internet than Megan Phelps-Roper circa 2011. You went hard in the paint, Megan. Somehow she's here on this stage.
I'm so sorry.
Which is that I think it's one of the reasons that we're here is like we affect each other. We don't always know how it's going to affect each other, but if you engage thoughtfully in your life and yes, on the internet, you might affect the kind of change that you want to. If you sit back and you think, what am I doing this for? What are the values that I'm trying to live out in whatever endeavor I'm undertaking? And I do think that that is one of the problems that we've been having with social media is that, like, are you just doing this for attention? Are you just doing this for some sort of, in-group identity clarification and you're trying to signal something? And if you take some time, you might hesitate. It's where you could get that pause before you jump on there and say something you may regret. But in this interaction I was having, I could tell that this person, and I suspected somebody like this would listen to my podcast that Megan and I made, because we were talking about some of the most contentious issues in our society, sex and gender and trans identity, and we weren't taking a side. And that is I've done enough reporting that for some of the people in this community, it is offensive to them when you don't take their side. And so I needed to anticipate that hurt that might come from what I did, and then try to communicate why we may have a difference of opinion about not this issue, but about journalism and about this piece of journalism. And yes, I was sad that after some interactions with this person, it seemed to devolve, as a lot of internet conversations do, into personal attacks and hyperbole and the worst kind of cruelty of internet behavior. But I also knew if I continued to engage in good faith, maybe she would, this person would a few days later come back, see it anew. I also knew that other people were going to see it, so maybe they could, in seeing how this dialogue went. And obviously, we had just done a podcast called "These Debates Are Really Hard, but We Think They're Worth It." So I had to money where your mouth is in the comments section. I know it's not the ideal place. I'm with Roxane. The more we can do this in person, I think the better results we're going to see.
Can I say one thing? Oh, sorry.
No, you go.
I was just, like, you said it went pretty poorly, and I would say, like, if you rewound the tape, like, back to, when I was at Westboro, and you watch these interactions, and it looks like it's going really, really poorly, but it's a process. I mean, it's life. Life is a process, and so you have no idea whether those engagements, or each one of our engagements with people, especially across ideological divides, we are being affected and they are being affected. You're not seeing the end result and all of the consequences that will fall out from this. So it may have looked like it was going poorly, but you actually have no idea where it's going to go. And that's why I think, committing to that principle, it's much easier for me because I understand that it's a process. And
I
it takes
used to
time
engage much more on social media than I do now. That was partly because I was trying to create a show about trolls. And so I treated trolls as hecklers for a long time. And that was involved a certain type of engagement, because I would sort of say yes to them in order to bring them down at the same time, because that's actually the best way of dealing with hecklers, is to sort of say yes but kind of thing. So for example, just to choose one at random, I remember someone calling me a privileged idiot, but he spelled privilege with an A. So I said, yeah, I'm so privileged I know how to spell it. And then immediately I got someone saying, calling out spelling mistakes on Twitter is so 2015. I said, you spelled so wrong.
I can see why you did really well on social media.
But I've stopped doing that now because it was a time when it did feel like you were in enough of a room, as it were, in social media, that the rules that are kind of there in comedy apply, which is that, like, if you've managed to put someone down in a funny way, then that's kind of it. I mean, they probably carry on shouting into the dark, but that's kind of it. But now, it is mainly trolls on Twitter. That is like the top note on Twitter. As Roxane said, he has spelt sewage all over the town square. And so as a result, there's kind of no point. You can only do a put down of a heckler if most of the room are not hecklers.
Right. Yeah. We're going to be having some audience questions in a moment, in a few minutes' time. So we're going to be putting some microphones down the front of the room in these two corridors here. So if you have a question that you would like to put to the panel, and a question ends with a question mark, it's usually about a sentence long or so, formulate that in your mind and step down to the front now, start lining up, and we'll get to you in a few minutes' time. So I do want to give you an opportunity to ask some questions. I want to turn now to what we can do to de-shitify communication online.
That's not a word.
It's not a word. Thanks for correcting me, Dave.
Like your tweet.
What can we do if online discourse has so many forces working against it, including, for example, that engagement is rewarded, but engagement is not, it can be positive, it can be negative. In fact, negative engagement has been shown, or negative comments have been shown to generate greater levels of engagement on a lot of social media platforms. How can we make changes in the way we individually communicate to encourage greater engagement, greater persuasion, and greater understanding and tolerance and other values that we generally want to espouse, whilst drawing a line around the kinds of discourse that we don't believe in? Like, how is there a role for forgiveness or redemption? I mean, Roxane, you've talked about, like, how can we understand and acknowledge and genuinely see that someone is contrite, that someone has turned a corner and has changed, and is there a way that we can find forgiveness for them?
Well, there has to be a path for redemption. Otherwise, we're going to suggest that people make a mistake, one mistake, and that's the end of the line for them. And if that's the case, then it's the end of the line for all of us, because everyone makes mistakes. And, you know, social media engagement in particular is challenging, and I've written about this, because people tend to approach social media as everyone being a nail and that you're a hammer. And you just want to sort of hammer that nail over and over. And the longer you spend online, the more brittle you become, and the more unwilling you are to give people the benefit of the doubt that maybe they are not evil incarnate, which is sometimes the case, and sometimes it isn't. But there has to be a space for forgiveness. There has to be space for people to say, I apologize and I'm wrong. And of course, people have to learn how to apologize, like, not just, I'm sorry you feel that way. I'm sorry if you were hurt. No, like, I'm sorry I hurt you. And make these apologies active. And then I think it's up to the people who are directly harmed to talk with the person that has caused harm and see what reparation can look like. I don't know that it's for the sort of crowd in the square to decide, even though I think a lot of people would like to be sort of the arbiter of justice in all things. But I don't think that's how reparative justice can or should work.
Can I just add a footnote to that, which I think, like, just to do with the technology again, which is, that thing is completely obviously right, that if you make one mistake, you shouldn't be down forever. But I think that it has changed our sense of time, social media, having a screen that we can all rely on, because those jokes that happened a long time ago, or that bad thing that you did a long time ago, if it's happening on your screen now, and if there's footage of it now, you're seeing it now. And it feels like it happened now or yesterday or whatever. So there's a crushing of time where I think that, like, the bad things just seem like they're in an eternal present online. And that sense that, well, this happened a long time ago, that you referred to really early on, just vanishes.
Is there in terms of this aspect of forgiveness, though, which I want to go to, is there a power imbalance? Is there an asymmetry? I mean, you've written before that there's a quote from one of your articles here saying, black people forgive because we need to survive, whereas white people embrace narratives of forgiveness so they can pretend the world is a fairer place than it actually is. Now, that's in a particular context. That's not in every context. Correct. But I think that highlights that there is a different cost for different individuals and different communities to exercise forgiveness, or say civility. Civility is often a virtue that we promote, and yet civility is often also used to suppress voices, to say, you're too angry, we're not going to listen to you. Is there an imbalance there?
Well, there can be, and that's why, you know, context matters and identity does matter. I wrote that essay in response to the church shooting in South Carolina, where immediately after the shooting, people were saying the survivors in the congregation should forgive, and like the bodies had not been removed from the church. Like, what are you talking about? There needs to be time. There needs to be processing. There needs to be grieving. And so we can't treat anything with a unilateral sort of swipe. And context really does matter. And so when we're talking about forgiveness, you really have to look at the way in which forgiveness is being asked for, the way it's being offered, and not all forgiveness is created equal, but we have to start somewhere. So I don't think it's something where we just throw our hands up like, oh, it's too complicated. It's not too complicated, but it's not simple either.
Thank you. And Andy, you've written before, you've said before that there's a virtue in forgiveness, not just in terms of the social effect of bringing someone who is genuinely, apologetic for what they've done and have changed back into the community. But you've said it's good for the forgiven as well. Can you speak to that?
I mean, even for the forgiver.
For the forgiver.
I'm an advocate for forgiveness, for sure. It has been powerful in my personal life. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, we're in this time where it would be good for us to try and sit back and say, what are the values we as individuals want to live by? We, as participants in any institution we're a part of, what are their values? Are they values we like? Let's check in on them. Are we living any of those values out in any actionable way? And I would just advocate that one value you should consider is forgiveness. And an abundance of forgiveness inside of your friendship circle and your family and your institution, and yes, in society broader, I believe would be better. It's a weird thing, and if you like, it's not like a natural law. I don't think it comes to us naturally. It's painful. It's one of the reasons we have to gin it up as this value, because sometimes the person just doesn't deserve our forgiveness. They did something so bad that no reasonable person would ever say we should forgive them. And yet even then, I have found it to be good, not just for society, but for you to forgive that person. It's that, we talked a lot, Megan and I talk a lot about the freedom of speech. It's the thing we care about. And one of the things we try and say is, obviously it comes with real dangers and real risks. But we think that you try to lean as much into the freedom of speech because we want to have the kind of pluralistic, diverse society that we think would be good for the future well-being, right? Similarly with forgiveness, it's like trying to forgive as much as you can. And it's painful and emotional. And it doesn't feel like justice, because sometimes it isn't. You have to give up that lust for vengeance and justice sometimes to do it. I just happen to think that over time it'll be better, and I could go into more details of why. For example, would Megan be here in a just world by the social justice system that we have on the internet now? Would we have forgiven her for what she did? I don't know if we would. Had she left in 2015, 2016, 2017, would we be better off? No. But it hadn't yet gotten that cruel. And I'm saying I want to get back to that as not just on the internet or whatever, because I don't use social media much anymore and recommend everybody get the hell off, get a book. But it's a reflection of us as a culture. We're not going to find a technological solution. This thing Megan also says, we're not going to find a technological solution to this cultural problem that we have.
It's also, sorry, I know we've got questions, it's also really dull to rush to instantaneous judgment.
Yeah.
Basically, if you decide very quickly, based on your instinctive tribal identity or whatever it might be, or certainty that someone is a bad person, now obviously there are bad people, and there are trash opinions, but if you decide that about someone very quickly, then that's it. It's a full stop on human understanding. Whereas if you ask the question, why are they like this? Mm-hmm. What is it about them? I mean, as it happens, I met Megan the other day, and we had a really lovely conversation, and you seem really great. I didn't know. Sorry, I'm not flirting. And I then went and read up a little bit. I didn't know that much about the Westboro Baptist Church, and one thing I discovered about the Westboro Baptist Church is they are fucking anti-Semitic. I mean, really, like out of the whatever Holocaust denying, like mad, and that did not make me think, oh, I should not have been friendly with this person. Because that doesn't make me a great person. It just makes me like, but she's obviously, as well as being whatever contrition that you've sown, it would be incredibly uninteresting of me to think like that's all I want to know about you, I think.
Yeah, I think that people are socially isolating in ways that are so cruel. I run into it regularly, even in the journalistic worlds, where people don't want to hang out with somebody who might have a stink to them for something that they did years ago. I don't want to go to that party, or I won't be on that reporting trip, or I don't want to share a byline with that person. And that's happening in the institutions of power. Just think as that's trickling down. This is what I was bringing up earlier. I'm seeing this, my nieces and nephews in high school are picking up on this culture. Do we really want to pass this on?
So Megan, I want to ask you, you have said things in the past that most people in this room would strongly or violently disagree with.
Sorry.
And yet here you are, as we've pointed out. We've invited you on this panel for the role that you play in promoting a kind of discourse today. Do you want to talk a little bit about your pathway to redemption and the role that discourse played and the people who spoke to you played, and what you've learnt from that we might learn in terms of discourse?
The epigraph of my book is this line from The Great Gatsby. It says, "Reserving judgments is a matter of infinite hope." And to me, that encapsulates the idea of grace, right? It's the willingness to recognize that people are on a journey, like we were talking about earlier, and the willingness to withhold judgment, to recognize that they can grow and they can change and that we can be part of that. The people, when I look back at the things that I said and did, when I see, I couldn't do it for a long time, but when I would look back and see videos of me and the things that I was saying, it was a very strange, split screen, because I knew exactly why I said those things and why I believed those things, and exactly why I don't believe them now. And for me, it was pure grace for the people who saw that old version of me and who were willing to look past the condescension and the cruelty that we displayed, that I displayed, and to say, this is a person, and there is hope for her. And it shocks me too. It seems laughable when you look at those old videos. But yeah, I find that because of the grace that they showed me, both before I left in being willing to have those conversations, but also especially after I left. Because when a few months after I left, I published an open letter essentially saying, I left, here's why, I'm sorry, I regret hurting people. I had zero expectation for forgiveness because I had been raised to believe that the outside world was evil, that there was no hope for me on the outside. And the response that I got this is at the end of 2012, I don't think it would have been the same response, as Andy was saying, 2 or 3 years later. I don't think it would have been the same 2 or 3 years later. But at the end of 2012, it was an absolute outpouring of kindness and grace and hope and the withholding of judgment. People were saying, we'll wait and see what they do now. And please come to my house, have a cup of coffee. I would love to talk to you. I would love to help you. And scenes like that actually did end up playing out among the very communities that I had been targeting my entire life. I was 26 years old, and every day was spent at the Westboro Baptist Church. And it was with the Jewish community, first and foremost, and then it was with the gay community, and atheists, and Christians, all these people, all these groups that we had targeted. And that was completely transformative. And that experience is why I think I'm so dedicated. This idea of grace is absolutely the foundation of my worldview now. Because I recognize that even people who are doing really horrible things, there is a possibility. The tape isn't over. We're not at the end of the movie yet. And I just find enormous hope in that. And I'm so grateful, and I feel like I'm just trying to sort of pass on the incredible grace that was shown to me.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Now, I would like to open the floor to some questions from the audience, and I remind you, just in the interest of time, we may not be able to get through all of the questions, but I encourage you to ask a question. Please try to keep it short if you would like to direct it to a particular panelist, and I will reserve the right to cut you short if I feel like we're running out of time. I'm going to start over on this side. Please go ahead.
I actually don't think there's much more to add to this. It was getting addressed at the end, but my question was, what are the actionable expressions of forgiveness in society right now? Because we're probably getting very educated in the exclusion and the in cancellation. So you started touching on that. There might be nothing else to add. What does that look like? And I know there's not one broad stroke either, like you were saying, Roxane.
So what are the actionable...
Yeah, what are the actions of society forgiveness? What does that tangibly look like?
Excellent question. Thank you so much. Would someone like to respond to that? Roxane?
You know, I think first, what are the actionable forms of contrition? And then, you know, forgiveness means moving on and not throwing it in someone's face, like every single time, like they do something that displeases you. You can't bring the mistake up over and over. If you forgive someone, you have to move on. It doesn't mean you necessarily forget, which I get from my mother, but it does mean that you have to actually let the person grow, let the person be different. If you don't create that space, then there's no point in talking about forgiveness, and what you're doing is not really forgiveness. What you're doing is a different form of punishment.
I would only, if I could add one thing to that, because I think there could be a little bit of difference between us. I think we're policing the fuck out of people's apologies. As a person who's been publicly shamed, you're not at your most articulate in that moment, and you want it to go away. Your first apology may not be very good, you know, because you're going through something that is hell. It's like absolutely one of the most painful experiences of your whole life. You're not going to write the best apology in that moment. And sometimes you just have to judge people more on who they become over time and not always how good they were at that apology. People don't always have that gift. They flub around. And if we want to see it in action, it's saying, I'm going to judge you, like with Megan, I'm judging you based on your life as it is now, not constantly going back and saying, did you do enough to get back? You know, do you still deserve the grace we gave?
There's in John Ronson's book, So You've Been Publicly Shamed, most of the people early examples of public shaming that he used in that, most of them did apologise, apart from one person. And John asked him why he didn't apologise, and he said because they don't. An apology, in, as it were, real life, is an actual transaction, a sort of emotional, intellectual transaction. That's not what, he said, these people want. What they want is for me to die. Essentially, they want me to die or be erased and only exist as a reference point for the bad thing that I did. And so therefore, all that will happen if I do an apology is rejection of the apology, which is I kind of think what you're talking about. But that was quite early on, and now I think it is now such a thing that we see all the time that I'm not sure that's absolutely true. But then also you get, as Roxane was saying, this kind of rote apology as well that may not be useful. So I think, again, it's just a learning process. It's a very young technology. In my documentary, Caitlin Moran, who I interviewed, talked about the internet or social media as being like a child that is young and is presently learning itself and is presently having tantrums itself and rages itself, but now is going into adolescence and is perhaps learning.
As John Ronson put it, it's a toddler crawling towards a gun.
Right. And I'll just say, I don't know how aware people are that the economy follows this. There are, when you get publicly shamed in the US now, you'll hear from public apology consultants who, for a very reasonable fee.
Oh, God.
Anyway.
All right, thank you. Let's go to a question over here. Please go ahead.
Hello, is this on? Cool, it's on.
It is on.
Great. When does it get to a point in all of our day-to-day interactions that you can't keep on gentle parenting someone into being a decent human being? So this is more targeted at Roxane and Megan, but I'm happy for the panel to answer it. Thank you.
Oh, I think you know when you know. You know, when you constantly have to correct, not even correct, because like it's not your job to parent the world, but when you find that you constantly are running up against someone who's choosing to behave badly, it becomes at some point you recognize that's a choice. Now, some people have the generosity of spirit to like sit with them and sort of be like, why are you being bad? But some of us don't, and I'm one of those people. And in those instances, you have to ask yourself, how much more of my energy am I going to invest in someone who doesn't care about that investment? It has to be a two-way street, as others have said on this panel. Like, it's give and take, and if it's just give, that's when you know.
Megan, would you like to respond?
I mean, for me, I think in principle, as long as that person is alive, there's hope for them. And that doesn't mean that I can or will give every bit of my attention to a person, but as I have capacity and to invest in a person, and obviously the more if I think I'm being effective or could possibly be effective, I'm going to be more incentivized to engage. So yeah, as long as that person's alive, I have hope for them. I can't help it because I know what I come from.
All right, now we are just about out of time, so I have to apologise. I'm afraid we're not going to be able to take any more questions from the floor. I'm very sorry about that. But all that is really left for me to say is just to invite you all to thank our panellists for the conversation we've had today. Roxane Gay, Megan Phelps-Roper, David Baddiel, and Annie Mills. My name is Tim Dean. It's been a real pleasure to be with you here today. I hope you enjoy the rest of your time at the Festival of Dangerous Ideas.
This session was recorded live at Carriage Works Sydney in August 2024. The Festival of Dangerous Ideas is presented by the Ethics Centre. The Ethics Centre delivers programs and experiences designed to bring ethics to the centre of our life. We offer counselling for individuals, leadership and development services, events, courses and educational resources. As a not-for-profit charity, we rely heavily on donations and memberships. Please visit ethics.org.au to find out more. Thank you.